Manhattan, plus a number of community leaders and community activists. And we're here today to celebrate the signing of legislation that has been long in the making that will protect tenants and possibly even save lives. The history of this legislation is quite long. Back in 2002, 18 years ago, there was a tragic fire in a building in my district at 3569 DeKalb Avenue, and a fire that should never have happened. The landlord was ordered to fix many problems in the building, violations that never happened. The fire resulted in the death of a young boy, an 8-year-old boy named Jashawn Parker. And that was a terrible tragedy that was totally avoidable. And I promised myself at the time that we are going to at least pass legislation that would enforce stricter requirements on landlords by setting time limits on when they have to make repairs that are ordered by judges. Now, 2002 is a long time ago, but I swore to myself we would never give up. We passed this bill time after time over the years in the New York State Assembly, but it never passed the New York State Senate until this year, thanks to Senator Jackson and his colleagues. And the Governor Cuomo, signed the bill into law last week, and we are thrilled. And what the bill does, very simply, is it amends Subdivision A of Section 777 of the Real Property Action and Proceedings Law, and it sets the time that a court may grant for work to be completed to remedy housing code violations at 60 days and prohibits them from applying for a consent order more than once. That is in sharp contrast to what the law has been all these years, which essentially was open-ended, which meant really there were no limits that would force a landlord to make necessary and possibly life-saving repairs. And I remember visiting that building back in 2002, and I was horrified. You walk right into the building, there were no locked doors. I walked up the steps, and believe it or not, on the staircase, there were actually steps missing. If you took a misstep, you could fall through. If you walk up to the roof, you walk right onto the roof. There were no locked doors there either, and there was evidence of significant drug use taking place on the roof. But I also saw some of the apartments that had chunks of ceilings missing or floors missing. It was just horrifying. But this electrical fire that was a result of faulty wiring was also one of the problems in the building. The fire took the life of 8-year-old Jashawn. It should have never happened. Hopefully this new law will prevent anything like that from ever happening again. With that, I would like to introduce my colleague, my really hardworking colleague, State Senator Robert Jackson.
Assemblyman Dinowitz, let me thank you for your leadership. Obviously, we're celebrating a law that should have been passed decades ago, in my opinion. This bill is a tragedy that occurred, the death of a child. When I was a former member of the City Council, Oliver Capel, my colleague in the City Council, introduced a City Council resolution that passed, basically based on the fact that you submitted legislation up in Albany, and knowing that the death of the child occurred a year earlier, should have never happened. Landlords now are required to make court-ordered repairs within 60 days, and they only have one opportunity to ask for an extension, and it's up to the court to give them that extension. So, you know, this legislation, if you're not aware, it was Senate Bill 3320 that passed in the Senate, but several of my colleagues had it before that on a continuous basis, year after year after year, as Assemblymember Dinowitz indicated, since he introduced the bill in 2003, passed the Assembly every single year, but went nowhere in the New York State Senate. It was being blocked by my colleagues, the Republican colleagues in the New York State Senate. Let me call it like it is. It would be very diplomatic to say my colleagues. Yes, they're my colleagues, but they're Republican, and they held it up for all of these years. And now finally, because in 2019, the Democrats became the majority in the Senate, this legislation has passed, like many other pieces of legislation. So Assembly Member, let me thank you for carrying this year after year, having the Assembly to pass it year after year. In your district, you walked through that building. You got to see the situation that existed at that time that families were going through. The life of this child should have never happened. I mean, he should have never died as a result of electrical fire or any other situation. And the bill, as we all know, if the courts can require action to be taken by the landlord or giving the building over to a 7A administrator to deal with the situations that exist regarding life, health, and safety. So understanding that that this should have been a long time ago, I say to you, thank you for staying the course. It's finally happening. And when we fight together, we can end landlord neglect. And so with that, I thank you, my colleague, and on behalf of all of you, not only this affects New York City, but the entire state of New York. So I wish my colleagues on the other side would get on it to protect those that need to be protected. Thank you.
I would like to introduce now an individual who played a very major role in turning that building around. And I just want to point out first that if Jashawn Parker had lived, he would be 26 years old today and perhaps even raising his own family. It's really a tragic loss. But at the time, after the event, John Riley took charge of the building, and I just want to introduce him, John Riley from Fordham-Bedford Housing.
Right. I would just like to reiterate what the Assemblyman said about the conditions in the building. They were deplorable. There were hundreds of very serious violations, code violations that had been neglected for many years. And when the court appointed us as 7A administrator, all of the money from the rent roll then goes into repairs in the building. So the tenants started to see improvements right away. But then shortly after we were able to get financing from the city, they they make a loan to the 7A that becomes a lien on the building. And we were able then to replace all the plumbing in the building. A new roof was installed. We upgraded all the electrical. There were lead violations, hazards that were corrected, and building security was all improved. And just all kinds of repairs inside people's apartments, those steps that the Assemblyman mentioned, all of those were repaired. So it really didn't need to come to where you had a tragedy to force this to happen. So this law hopefully will help avoid that happening in the future, that repairs can be gotten in a timely manner.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you for turning that building around. Your hard work really made a difference. Senator Jackson? I think Senator Jackson is going to be introducing our next speaker. Unfortunately, he's muted.
Senator, you're on mute.
Sorry, Senator Jackson, could you unmute?
Apologize. So we're going to hear from the Legal Aid Society that will speak about the 7A case. This law will help. So.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Jessica Belinder. I'm a supervising attorney with the Legal Aid Society's Bronx neighborhood office, and I supervise a group of attorneys who work with tenant groups to start cases like 7As. And for our clients, they're usually, this is sort of the last resort in terms of the type of litigation they've engaged in or the type of advocacy they've engaged in. They've often, gone through a lot of non-litigation advocacy or HP cases or other ways to try to get the work done, and they come to the court finally with a 7A, and time is really of the essence at that point. And so having the court have to recognize that the time is of the essence is a really important aspect of this legislation, because what we find often is that the court process doesn't really recognize the urgency that the tenants feel and the conditions that they have. Many of our clients have really terrible conditions like the ones that that were discussed earlier, although not usually not, they haven't gotten to the point where someone has died, but they're, you know, families are living in really terrible situations with active leaks that are causing terrible mold. Often the security systems are not working. There's terrible rodent infestations. And for a lot of our clients in the Bronx, at least, they don't have a lot of options to just move when the building deteriorates. They need to be able to hold their landlord accountable to be able to stay in affordable housing. And so they need every tool available to them to force landlords to step up and take responsibility for their buildings. And so to the extent that the legislation signals to the court and to the landlord that this is taken seriously and that they need to move forward with sort of alacrity, I think that that's a fantastic step in the right direction. We look forward to more legislation like this surrounding the 7A program, because I think it's one of the underutilized and very powerful tools that tenants have. And we would love to see some additional expansion of the protections under this type of legislation. And I think at this point, I'm going to let that be what I have to say. Thanks very much.
Okay, I believe Senator Jackson is going to introduce our next speaker from Take Root Justice.
Thank you. So we have Greg Baltz here from Take the Roots, who will speak about the 7A case this law would have helped in gesturing toward the future reforms that are necessary. So, and I am willing, and my staff is listening, Matthew Levy, our policy director, our chief of staff, Joanna Garcia, Chris Nichols, our deputy chief of staff. And so we're just interested in doing whatever we can to make sure that the housing that people live in meets all of the legal requirements and they're safe. That's the most important thing. So Greg, take over, please.
Thank you so much, Senator Jackson and Assemblyman Dinowitz. So my name is Greg Baltz, and I work at Take Root Justice, where we represent tenant associations organizing for better conditions and against harassment in the Bronx and Manhattan, as well as Queens and Brooklyn. In our work, we rely heavily on Article 7A, this law that can really make a meaningful difference for tenants living with dangerous conditions. The law as written says that a judge can take control of a building away from a landlord who has failed or refused to address conditions that are dangerous to the health, life, and safety of the tenants in that building. And those conditions just need to have existed for 5 days, which is already too long. Unfortunately, the way that we see these processes work out in housing court is that it takes months of procedure and trial to actually get to a point where the judge is ready to make a decision about these conditions. And we're talking about threats of electrical fire, collapsing ceilings due to leaks, workers that are generating lead dust that's poisoning children, uncontrolled infestations, conditions that no one should live with for 5 days, let alone many months. But worse, the state of the law before this bill was passed was that even after a trial, even after having proven that these conditions had existed, landlords would end up getting second, third, fourth bites at the apple as long as they could put up the money to say that they wanted to stay in control, rather than having the judge go ahead and appointing a 7A administrator, an independent administrator like Fordham-Bedford, to actually dedicate the rent roll and the money for being collected from the tenants to make repairs rather than going into the landlord's pocket. That's the loophole that State Senator Jackson and Assemblyman Dinowitz's bill addressed, and that we at Take Root Justice are really excited to actually see implemented come December. This law is a hard-fought victory, not only for our elected officials, but also for all the tenants who are going to benefit from it, to ensure that landlords going forward have to take a 7A case seriously. And we're really excited for other future opportunities for reform of this program, including fast tracking, making funding available for addressing emergency conditions for our 7A administrators to give them the tools that they need to get into a building and work as quickly as possible. Also, stronger anti-retaliation protections for tenants who decide to stand up in the face of severe harassment in order to ask a court to appoint a 7A administrator when their landlord is just not living up to their obligations. So thank you again to you both and for everyone for participating today.
Okay, thank you. And it is my pleasure now to introduce Josh Stevenson of West Bronx Housing. He has done amazing work in our area of the Bronx, the Northwest Bronx, which includes the Norwood section where this building 3569 DeKalb Avenue is located. So Josh.
Thank you for introducing me, Assemblyman Dinowitz, and thank you as always for your support, and my thanks to you and Senator Jackson for having me. My name is Joshua Stevenson. I'm the Executive Director of West Bronx Housing and Neighborhood Resource Center. We're an organization that focuses on landlord-tenant mediation, anti-harassment, eviction prevention, and tenant organizing in the Northwest Bronx. So that focuses mostly on, Norwood, Bedford Park, Woodlawn, Wakefield, some of Riverdale, mostly community boards 5, 7, 8, and 12. So I'll give you, and I'm actually a Norwood resident myself, so I live very, very close to this building. I'll give you a little bit of history. So Sally Dunford, the previous executive director, visited the property as well in 2007 and spent 2 years petitioning for a new administrator for this building. And as we often see with the court, landlords like this are often able to just afford delay after delay after delay while tenants are left in the dark. And so Jashawn was 8 when the tragedy took his life in 2002. 10 years later, Sally Dunford started a fundraiser for a headstone for his grave. 10 years after the event, he would have probably been graduating from high school at the age of 18. So I can't really say it much better than it's already been said by everyone else. So I'll briefly talk about what we at West Bronx Housing are anticipating. One of the things we're worried about is the potential for property owners to just outright refuse to do repairs, citing the economic conditions from the COVID pandemic. This coupled with the fact that you actually are more likely to see fires in the winter because a lot of people, especially people that aren't getting the heat and hot water requirements from their landlords, will use heaters. So we're going to see a lot more fires. And so that's one of the things that we're anticipating. And that's why this legislation is so important and actually hopefully will preempt issues like this. So thank you very much, Assemblyman Dinowitz and Senator Robert Jackson for your leadership on this. It's incredibly important that this legislation is passed, finally.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it did take a while, didn't it? If there are any questions from the press, we'd be happy to try to respond.
So we have a question from Greg McQueen at the Manhattan Times and the Bronx Free Press in the chat, and it just disappeared. What type of building violations does this legislation cover? Is it only Class C violations, the most dangerous? And I think that's a question that any of the speakers could take a crack at.
Well, obviously, Class C violations are the highest violations that put the jeopardy of the life and health of the tenants. But this building that we're talking about had about 384 violations, and some of them, many of them were Class C, but there may have been others. But the bottom line is, though, that's what HPD, in order to bring a 7A court action, has to do. And the tenants, the current law basically says where 1/3 of the tenants in the building push HPD to file a 7A action, that's what has to be done. And so that's why tenant organizing is very important. That's why you have the West Bronx Housing, and that's why you have John with the Fordham group advocates fighting for the tenants, because they know, as Assemblyman Dinowitz said, he walked through that building. There were missing stairs. There were so many violations that were C violations that put the life of people in jeopardy. And so that's what it is. But I think it would be appropriate to talk to the attorneys that are handling the cases that we see every single year.
This is Jessica from Legal Aid again. So I put in the chat the section of the law that sort of outlines the kinds of things that are considered. So this is RPAPL 770, subsection 1. And they're looking at violations of the Housing Maintenance Code within the city of New York in particular, and then they're looking at other counties. Nassau, Suffolk, Rockland, and Westchester have different sort of legislation, but they're looking at lack of heat, lack of running water, light, electricity, inadequate sewage disposal, or other conditions dangerous to the life, health, and safety of the residents that have existed for 5 days. They're also looking at infestations of rodents or any combination of conditions or a course of conduct by the owner or the agent for harassment, illegal eviction, deprivation of services, or acts dangerous to the life, health, or safety of the tenants.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. I guess we have concluded then. Thank you all very much, Senator Jackson, all of our advocates here. The work you do really makes a difference in the lives of countless people, and it's much appreciated. Have a good morning, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.